Marcus stood outside the company gates at 6 in the morning, clutching his third job rejection letter of the week. Jake Morrison, the supervisor, publicly humiliated him in front of his colleagues. "People like you can never be trusted." The insults echoed through the lobby. Marcus had no idea that the elderly man he had rescued during last night's storm was standing right there, silently witnessing everything. And when that old man stepped into the office with his true identity revealed, every vicious word Jake had just uttered would become his lifelong nightmare. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the thin walls of the cramped apartment at exactly 5:30 in the morning. Marcus Thompson rolled out of the narrow bed, his muscular frame aching from another restless night on the worn mattress. At 32, he carried the weight of the world on his broad shoulders, but it was a burden he bore with quiet dignity. The single father had learned long ago that complaining wouldn't change his circumstances. He padded softly across the cold linoleum floor to check on his daughter. 8-year-old Zoe lay curled up under a patchwork quilt their late grandmother had sewn, her dark curls spread across the pillow like a halo. Marcus felt his heart tighten as he watched her peaceful face, so innocent and trusting despite everything they'd endured together. She deserved so much more than this shabby 2-bedroom apartment in the rundown section of town, but it was all he could afford on his security guard's salary. The morning routine began like clockwork. Marcus prepared a simple breakfast of toast and scrambled eggs while Zoe got ready for school. Her uniform was clean but clearly second-hand, the edges frayed and colors slightly faded from countless washings. He'd noticed how some of the other children at her school looked at her clothes, their young faces already learning the cruel art of judgment that seemed so prevalent in their world. "Daddy, can I get new sneakers soon?" Zoe asked quietly, her small voice barely audible over the sizzling pan. She held up one foot, showing him where the sole had begun to separate from the worn canvas. Marcus felt his stomach drop, knowing that even a simple pair of children's shoes would strain their already tight budget. He'd been putting aside whatever spare change he could find, but unexpected expenses always seemed to appear just when he thought he might have enough saved. "We'll see what we can do, baby girl," he replied, forcing a smile as he placed her plate on their small kitchen table. The same table where he spent countless hours helping her with homework each night, watching her bright mind tackle problems that reminded him daily of her mother's intelligence. Sarah had been the dreamer between them, always talking about Zoe's future, the colleges she might attend, the opportunities that would be hers. Those conversations felt like echoes from another lifetime now. The walk to Zoe's school took them through several neighborhoods, each one a little nicer than theirs. Marcus held her hand tightly as they passed well-maintained houses with manicured lawns and luxury cars parked in circular driveways. He tried not to think about how different life might have been if Sarah's medical bills hadn't consumed their savings, if the insurance company hadn't found ways to deny coverage for her experimental treatments, if he'd been able to afford better care. After dropping Zoe off, Marcus caught the city bus to downtown, where the gleaming 30-story office building housed his workplace. Whitman Corporation occupied the top 15 floors, filled with executives and professionals who earned more in a month than Marcus made in a year. He spent his nights walking those polished marble hallways, ensuring their safety while they slept comfortably in their suburban homes. The day security supervisor, Jake Morrison, was waiting for him in the lobby when he arrived. A stocky man in his 40s with thinning brown hair and a perpetual scowl, Jake had made it clear from Marcus's first day that he considered him a temporary inconvenience rather than a valuable employee. The way Jake's pale blue eyes narrowed whenever he looked at Marcus spoke volumes about his true feelings, though he was careful never to voice them directly. "You're cutting it close again, Thompson," Jake said, checking his expensive watch with deliberate emphasis. "Night shift starts at 6 sharp, not 6:05. His tone carried the weight of barely concealed contempt, the kind of coded language that Marcus had learned to recognize over the years. It was never anything overtly racist, nothing that could be reported or documented, just a constant stream of microaggressions designed to make him feel unwelcome and expendable. Marcus checked the clock on the lobby wall. confirming he was actually 3 minutes early. "I'm here on time, sir," he replied calmly, refusing to take the bait. He'd learned that responding to Jake's provocations only gave the man more ammunition to use against him. Instead, he focused on doing his job with professionalism and integrity, hoping that his work ethic would eventually speak louder than Jake's prejudices. "Just make sure you stay that way," Jake muttered, turning away with a dismissive wave. "We've had complaints about the night crew's performance lately. Management's breathing down my neck about productivity standards." The implication was clear, even though Marcus knew his performance reviews had been consistently excellent. He'd never received a single complaint about his work, but facts seemed irrelevant when Jake was looking for reasons to create problems. As Jake disappeared into the elevator, Marcus took a deep breath and prepared for another long night of walking the empty corridors, checking doors, and monitoring security cameras. Somewhere high above in those luxury offices, decisions were being made that would affect thousands of lives. Fortunes were being built and lost, and careers were being launched. Down here in the lobby, Marcus simply tried to make it through each shift without incident, counting the hours until he could return home to the only person who truly mattered in his world. The rain began as a gentle drizzle around midnight, but by 2 o'clock it had transformed into a relentless downpour that hammered against the office building's floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus completed his hourly rounds through the empty corridors, his footsteps echoing off the polished marble floors as he checked each door and monitored the silent offices filled with expensive furniture and sleeping computers. During his break, he stood near the lobby's massive windows, watching the storm intensify outside. The streetlights created shimmering pools of yellow light on the flooded pavement, and the few brave souls still venturing outdoors hurried past with newspapers held over their heads or umbrellas turned inside out by the fierce wind. It was the kind of night that made him grateful for steady employment, even if it meant dealing with Jake's constant harassment. Around 3:30, movement outside caught his attention. Through the rain-streaked glass, he spotted an elderly figure struggling along the sidewalk, moving with obvious difficulty. The man appeared to be in his 70s, wearing what had once been an expensive suit, but was now completely soaked through. He carried a briefcase in one hand, while using the other to steady himself against parked cars and building walls. Marcus watched with growing concern as the elderly gentleman stumbled, catching himself just before falling completely. The man's car sat motionless at the curb, its hazard lights blinking weakly through the storm. Steam rose from under the hood, suggesting engine trouble that had left him stranded in the worst possible weather. No taxis were visible on the deserted streets, and the nearest bus stop was several blocks away. The security protocols were crystal clear about leaving his post during assigned shifts. Jake had emphasized this point repeatedly, making it obvious that any deviation would result in immediate termination. Marcus thought about Zoe sleeping peacefully at home, counting on him to maintain the job that kept their small apartment and put food on their table. One wrong decision could destroy everything he'd worked so hard to build for her. But watching the struggling figure outside, Marcus felt his conscience override his fears. This wasn't about policies or procedures anymore. This was about basic human decency, the kind of values his grandmother had instilled in him long before life became so complicated. She'd always taught him that helping others wasn't optional when you had the ability to make a difference. He grabbed his jacket and rushed outside, immediately feeling the cold rain soak through his uniform. "Sir, are you all right?" he called out, jogging toward the elderly man who was now leaning heavily against a lamppost, breathing hard and looking disoriented. "My car broke down," the man replied, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I've been trying to find somewhere dry to wait, but everything's closed." Up close, Marcus could see that despite his expensive clothing, this was someone's grandfather, vulnerable and alone in a dangerous situation. "Let me help you," Marcus said without hesitation. "There's a hospital about 10 minutes from here. We should get you checked out." The man's skin looked pale in the streetlight, and Marcus noticed a small cut on his forehead where he might have struck something during his struggle with the weather. "I don't want to be any trouble," the elderly gentleman protested weakly. But Marcus was already helping him toward his security vehicle, knowing that every minute outside in this storm increased the risk of hypothermia or worse. During the drive to the emergency room, the man introduced himself as Henry Whitman. He spoke softly about being caught off guard by the sudden storm after working late at his office, grateful for Marcus's intervention when he'd begun to fear for his safety. Marcus found himself sharing details about his own life, mentioning Zoe and their modest circumstances while navigating the flooded streets. At the hospital, Marcus stayed until Henry was examined and treated for minor cuts and exposure. The doctors confirmed he would be fine but recommended rest and staying warm for the remainder of the night. When Henry offered to pay for a taxi home, Marcus insisted on driving him personally, ensuring his safety rather than abandoning him to navigate the continuing storm alone. By the time Marcus returned to his post, dawn was breaking over the city, and his replacement had already arrived for the morning shift. He'd been away from his station for nearly 3 hours, helping a stranger when he should have been protecting an empty building. The decision felt right in his heart, but his mind raced with worry about the consequences that would surely follow once Jake discovered his absence. The morning sun cast long shadows across the office building's lobby when Jake Morrison arrived at 7:15. Clutching his usual oversized coffee cup and wearing his trademark scowl. His pale eyes immediately scanned the security desk, noting the shift change paperwork that would detail the previous night's activities. Marcus had documented his rounds meticulously as always, but the 3-hour gap in his presence would be impossible to explain away. "Thompson!" Jake's voice boomed across the marble expanse, causing several early-arriving office workers to glance in their direction. "My office. Now." The tone left no room for negotiation, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he followed the supervisor down the hallway toward the security department's cramped administrative space. Jake's office reflected his personality perfectly, cluttered, unwelcoming, and dominated by a large desk covered with complaint forms and disciplinary notices. Motivational posters about workplace productivity hung crooked on the beige walls, their messages about teamwork and excellence seeming hollow in the oppressive atmosphere. Jake settled into his chair with obvious satisfaction, savoring the moment before delivering what he clearly considered long overdue justice. "Care to explain why the lobby was unattended for 3 hours last night?" Jake asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "Security cameras show you leaving the building at 3:45 and not returning until 6:30. That's a pretty serious breach of protocol, wouldn't you say?" He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, enjoying the power dynamics of the situation. Marcus had prepared for this confrontation during his sleepless morning hours at home. There was an emergency situation outside. An elderly man was stranded in the storm and needed medical attention. I felt it was the right thing to do. His voice remained steady despite the anxiety churning in his chest, knowing that Jake had been looking for an excuse like this for months. The right thing? Jake's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Your job description doesn't include playing Good Samaritan on company time. We have protocols for a reason, Thompson. You can't just abandon your responsibilities whenever you feel like being a hero." The words were carefully chosen, each one designed to undermine Marcus's dignity while maintaining plausible deniability about their underlying motivation. "I understand the policies, but this was a life-threatening situation," Marcus replied, refusing to back down. "I couldn't stand by and watch someone suffer when I had the ability to help." He thought about Henry's grateful handshake at the hospital, the relief in the elderly man's eyes when warmth and safety replaced fear and exposure. Jake shuffled through a stack of papers on his desk, making a show of consulting various documents and policy manuals. "Says here that abandoning your post is grounds for immediate termination. No exceptions, no appeals process. Pretty cut and dried, if you ask me." His tone suggested he was enjoying every word, finally having found the ammunition he'd been seeking since Marcus's first day on the job. The conversation that followed felt surreal to Marcus, as if he were watching someone else's life unravel in slow motion. Jake cited regulation after regulation, each one delivered with increasing smugness, building his case for dismissal with the thoroughness of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that his act of compassion would be twisted into grounds for punishment. "Pack up your locker and turn in your badge," Jake concluded. sliding a termination form across the desk. "Security will escort you out. Don't expect any references from this company." The finality in his voice made it clear that no amount of explanation or pleading would change the outcome of this predetermined verdict. Walking home through the morning sunshine, Marcus felt the weight of unemployment settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. The irony was crushing. He'd lost his job for helping someone in need, the very kind of moral action that his grandmother had taught him was fundamental to being a good person. Now he faced the impossible task of explaining to Zoe why their already precarious financial situation had just become desperate. The apartment felt different when he returned, smaller somehow, as if the walls had moved closer together during his absence. Bills lay scattered across the kitchen table where he'd left them the night before, each one representing a monthly obligation that would soon become impossible to meet. The rent was due in 2 weeks. Zoe needed those new shoes, and his savings account contained barely enough for groceries. He sat heavily on the second-hand couch, staring at the termination paperwork that officially ended his employment. The words seemed to blur together as exhaustion and worry clouded his vision. Somewhere in the city, Henry Whitman was probably starting his day refreshed and grateful, unaware that his rescuer was now facing homelessness because of that act of kindness. The sound of Zoe's alarm clock echoed from her bedroom, signaling the start of another school day. Marcus took a deep breath and prepared to face the morning routine, knowing he would have to maintain the pretense of normalcy until he figured out how to rebuild their shattered security. The little girl depending on him deserved better than watching her father's world collapse around them. Henry Whitman adjusted his silk tie as he stepped out of the executive elevator on the 30th floor of the gleaming office tower that bore his family name. At 72, he still commanded respect through his imposing presence and sharp intellect, though the events of the previous night had reminded him of his mortality. The corner office, with its panoramic city view, had been his domain for over 3 decades, but today he found himself distracted by thoughts of the young man who had saved his life. His assistant, Margaret, had already arranged his morning coffee and sorted through the daily reports that required his attention. The quarterly earnings looked promising. Several new contracts awaited his signature, and the board meeting agenda needed final approval. Yet Henry found his mind wandering back to Marcus Thompson, the security guard whose selfless actions had transformed a potentially tragic night into a story of human compassion. "Margaret, I need you to pull the personnel file for one of our night security staff," Henry said, settling behind his mahogany desk. "Marcus Thompson. I'd like to review his employment history and performance evaluations." His request was delivered in the same tone he used for routine business matters, but Margaret's raised eyebrow suggested she sensed something unusual about this particular inquiry. The file that arrived within the hour painted a picture that both impressed and troubled Henry. Marcus had been employed for 8 months, with perfect attendance, exemplary performance reviews, and 0 disciplinary actions. His supervisor's notes consistently praised his reliability, attention to detail, and professional demeanor. The contradiction between this sterling record and the man's modest circumstances seemed significant. Henry's curiosity deepened as he reviewed the security footage from the previous evening. The cameras clearly showed Marcus leaving his post to help during the storm, but they also revealed something more troubling. Earlier recordings from recent weeks displayed a pattern of hostile interactions between Marcus and his day supervisor, Jake Morrison. The body language alone told a story of systematic harassment disguised as legitimate workplace management. A plan began forming in Henry's mind as he studied Jake's employment history. The day supervisor's file contained several complaints from other employees about unprofessional behavior, though none had been formally pursued due to lack of concrete evidence. His performance reviews were mediocre at best, and his advancement within the company seemed based more on tenure than merit. Most tellingly, turnover in the security department had increased significantly since Jake's promotion to supervisor. Henry made a decision that would have surprised many who knew his typically hands-off management style. He cleared his afternoon schedule and took the executive elevator down to the lobby, exchanging his usual tailored suit for more casual attire from his office wardrobe. If he wanted to understand what was really happening in his building's security department, He needed to observe operations firsthand. The lobby bustled with afternoon activity as employees returned from lunch meetings and clients arrived for scheduled appointments. Henry positioned himself in an inconspicuous corner, pretending to read financial reports while actually watching Jake Morrison interact with his subordinates. What he witnessed confirmed his suspicions about the man's character and management approach. Jake's treatment of the security staff varied dramatically based on their appearance and background. White employees received friendly greetings and respectful communication, while minorities faced curt orders and dismissive attitudes. The pattern was subtle enough to avoid formal complaints, but obvious enough to create a hostile work environment for certain individuals. Henry recognized the coded language and microaggressions that Jake employed, tactics designed to intimidate without crossing legal boundaries. When Jake left for his scheduled break, Henry approached several security guards individually, engaging them in casual conversation about their work experiences. The stories he heard painted a disturbing picture of daily harassment, unrealistic expectations, and deliberate sabotage disguised as standard procedure. Marcus's termination, they explained, was just the latest example of Jake's systematic campaign against employees he deemed undesirable. One guard, an older Hispanic man named Carlos, spoke with particular passion about Marcus's character. "Best man we ever had on night shift," Carlos said quietly, glancing around to ensure Jake wasn't nearby. "Always helped new guys learn the ropes, never complained about extra duties, treated everyone with respect. Losing him is a real shame, especially for something like helping someone in trouble." Henry returned to his office that evening with a clear understanding of the situation and a determination to address it. The young man who had risked his job to save a stranger's life deserved better than being victimized by a supervisor's prejudices. More importantly, allowing Jake's behavior to continue would be a betrayal of the company values that Henry's father had established when founding Whitman Corporation 40 years earlier. The investigation phase was complete. Now it was time for action, though Henry knew he needed to proceed carefully. Direct intervention might solve Marcus's immediate problem, but could expose other victims to retaliation. The solution required finesse, timing, and a strategy that would address the broader cultural issues while ensuring justice for the man whose kindness had sparked this entire revelation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Henry felt energized by a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. The employment office on 5th Street buzzed with desperate energy as dozens of job seekers clutched resumes and waited for their names to be called. Marcus sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, watching the clock tick toward his third interview of the week. His best shirt was pressed and his shoes polished, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his efforts were futile before they even began. "Marcus Thompson?" A middle-aged woman with graying hair appeared at the reception desk, consulting her clipboard with practiced efficiency. He followed her down a narrow hallway lined with motivational posters about workplace success, each one seeming to mock his current circumstances. The interview room was sterile and impersonal, designed to process applicants quickly rather than encourage meaningful conversation. The hiring manager, a thin man in his 50s named Robert Klein, barely looked up from Marcus's application before launching into a series of questions that felt more like an interrogation than a job interview. His tone remained professionally neutral, but Marcus detected the subtle shift in body language that had become frustratingly familiar over the past week. The slight lean backward, the shortened eye contact, the way Klein's pen tapped impatiently against the desk. "I see here you were recently terminated from your security position," Klein said, his voice carrying just enough judgment to make Marcus feel defensive. "Care to explain the circumstances surrounding that decision?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, transforming Marcus's act of compassion into evidence of unreliability. Marcus explained the situation with Henry Whitman as honestly as possible, emphasizing the emergency nature of the circumstances and his commitment to helping others. Klein nodded occasionally, but seemed more interested in checking boxes on his evaluation form than understanding the moral complexity of the situation. When the interview concluded 15 minutes later, Marcus knew the outcome before Klein delivered his polite rejection. "We'll be in touch if anything opens up," Klein said, extending a handshake that felt perfunctory rather than genuine. "Good luck with your job search." The dismissal was swift and final, another door closing just as Marcus had allowed himself to hope it might open. Walking home through the afternoon heat, Marcus mentally calculated their remaining resources. The checking account held enough for 2 weeks of groceries, maybe 3 if they ate sparingly. The rent would be due in 10 days, and their landlord had made it clear that late payments weren't tolerated in his building. Zoe's school supplies needed replenishing, and those promised new shoes had become an urgent necessity as her current pair literally fell apart. The apartment felt oppressive when he returned, its small rooms seeming to shrink further with each passing day of unemployment. Bills covered the kitchen table like fallen leaves, each envelope containing demands for payment that would soon exceed his ability to meet them. The electricity notice warned of disconnection within a week, while medical bills from Sarah's final illness continued arriving with depressing regularity. Zoe arrived home from school with her usual bright smile, but Marcus noticed how she tried to hide her disappointment when he explained that her piano lessons would need to be postponed indefinitely. The 8-year-old accepted the news with maturity beyond her years, offering to help find ways to save money instead of complaining about the sacrifices they faced together. "Maybe I could get a paper route," she suggested earnestly, her small face serious with concentration. "Tommy's older brother makes $20 a week delivering newspapers in our neighborhood." Her willingness to shoulder adult responsibilities broke Marcus's heart, reminding him daily of how their circumstances were stealing pieces of her childhood. That evening brought news that made their situation even more precarious. Mrs. Henderson from the apartment downstairs knocked on their door with information about rent increases scheduled for the following month. The building's new management company was implementing across-the-board adjustments that would add another $75 to their monthly obligations, making their current home unaffordable even if Marcus found work immediately. Meanwhile, across town at Whitman Corporation, Jake Morrison was cementing his reputation for hostile management through increasingly aggressive treatment of the remaining security staff. Carlos reported to work each day, wondering if he would become the next target, while newer employees learned to avoid eye contact and minimize conversation to prevent drawing Jake's attention. The supervisor's confidence had grown since Marcus's termination, emboldening him to push boundaries that he'd previously approached more cautiously. Racial jokes disguised as workplace humor became more frequent. Scheduling assignments mysteriously favored certain employees over others, and performance evaluations reflected personal biases rather than actual work quality. The hostile environment was poisoning morale throughout the department. Henry Whitman continued his careful observation from afar, documenting patterns and building a case that would withstand legal scrutiny while ensuring justice for all affected parties. Each day brought new evidence of Jake's misconduct, strengthening Henry's resolve to address the situation decisively. The young man who had risked everything to help a stranger deserved vindication, but so did every employee suffering under Jake's discriminatory leadership. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape lives and restore faith in the possibility of justice. The morning staff meeting in the security department's conference room proceeded with its usual mundane agenda until an unexpected visitor appeared in the doorway. Henry Whitman, dressed in his finest charcoal suit and carrying himself with the authority of decades in corporate leadership, stepped into the cramped space that suddenly felt inadequate for his commanding presence. The assembled security guards exchanged bewildered glances, none recognizing the distinguished gentleman who had interrupted their routine briefing. Jake Morrison's face drained of color as recognition dawned. The coffee cup in his hands trembled slightly, sending ripples across the surface of the lukewarm liquid he'd been drinking while delivering another lecture about departmental standards. His usual confident demeanor evaporated instantly, replaced by the desperate panic of someone who realizes their career is about to implode spectacularly. "Please don't let me interrupt," Henry said, his voice carrying the calm authority that had commanded boardrooms for decades. "I'm Henry Whitman, and I wanted to personally observe how our security operations are managed. I trust that won't be a problem." The question was rhetorical, delivered with the kind of polite steel that made refusal impossible. Jake stammered through an introduction, his usual swagger replaced by nervous energy that made his hands shake as he gestured toward an empty chair. The other security guards sat in stunned silence, sensing the electricity in the air, but uncertain about the dynamics unfolding before them. Carlos caught the eye of his colleague Maria, both recognizing that something significant was happening beyond their understanding. "I've been reviewing personnel files lately," Henry continued, settling into the offered chair with deliberate grace. "Particularly interested in employee performance metrics and management decisions. Tell me, Mr. Morrison, about your recent staffing choices." The words were delivered casually, but their implication hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Jake's attempt to explain Marcus's termination quickly devolved into a rambling justification filled with policy citations and procedural references. Henry listened patiently, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp with intelligence that missed nothing. When Jake mentioned abandoning posts and violation of protocols, Henry's eyebrows raised slightly in what might have been surprise or skepticism. "Interesting perspective," Henry mused when Jake finally ran out of bureaucratic jargon. "I understand the terminated employee left his station to assist someone during that severe storm last week. Emergency medical situation, if I recall correctly." His tone remained conversational, but the security staff began to sense they were witnessing something far more significant than a routine inspection. Jake's face flushed red as he struggled to maintain his authoritative facade while acknowledging the circumstances he'd twisted into grounds for dismissal. "Policy is policy, sir. We can't make exceptions based on personal feelings or emotional decisions. Security requires discipline and adherence to established procedures." His voice grew stronger as he warmed to his familiar theme, apparently forgetting exactly who he was lecturing about organizational standards. "Personal feelings," Henry repeated thoughtfully, as if testing the phrase for its accuracy. "So you're suggesting that helping someone in a life-threatening emergency represents poor judgment rather than basic human decency?" The question carried enough edge to make several guards shift uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the trap that Jake was walking into with increasing confidence. "I'm saying that abandoning your assigned duties shows a fundamental lack of professional commitment," Jake replied, his voice taking on the condescending tone he typically used with subordinates. "These people need to understand that actions have consequences. You can't just do whatever feels good and expect to keep your job." The phrase, "these people," seemed to echo in the small room, its implications clear to everyone present. Henry's expression remained perfectly controlled, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. "These people," he repeated quietly, allowing the words to hang in the suddenly tense atmosphere. "Could you elaborate on what you mean by that particular phrase, Mr. Morrison?" The realization of his mistake hit Jake like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he scrambled for damage control, but the words had already been spoken in front of witnesses who understood their significance. The mask had slipped completely, revealing the prejudices that had driven his decisions throughout his tenure as supervisor. "I simply meant that all employees need to follow the same standards." Jake backpedaled desperately, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "No special treatment. No exceptions based on individual circumstances. Equal application of company policies across the board." His explanation sounded hollow even to his own ears. Henry stood slowly, his full height emphasizing the authority differential between them. "Mr. Morrison, your interpretation of equal treatment appears to differ significantly from mine. Perhaps we should discuss this matter privately in my office. Immediately." The invitation carried the weight of a command that no reasonable person would consider refusing. As Henry turned to leave, he paused at the doorway and addressed the remaining staff. "For those wondering about recent personnel decisions, I want you to know that this company values employees who demonstrate courage, compassion, and moral integrity. Those qualities will always be rewarded, not punished." His words carried a promise that transformed the atmosphere in the room from confusion to hope. The executive elevator climbed smoothly to the 30th floor, while Jake Morrison stood rigid beside Henry Whitman, his earlier confidence completely shattered. The polished brass interior reflected his pale, sweating face as floors ticked by in oppressive silence. Each passing second felt like an eternity as Jake contemplated the magnitude of his miscalculation in revealing his true attitudes to the company's chief executive officer. Henry's corner office commanded spectacular views of the city skyline, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a perspective that Jake had never imagined experiencing firsthand. The mahogany furniture and Persian rugs spoke of wealth and power accumulated over generations, while framed photographs on the credenza showed Henry with presidents, governors, and business leaders whose names regularly appeared in financial headlines. "Please have a seat," Henry said, gesturing toward one of the leather chairs positioned across from his imposing desk. His tone remained professionally courteous, but the underlying steel was unmistakable. Jake perched nervously on the edge of the chair, his hands fidgeting with his security badge as if it might somehow protect him from the reckoning that was clearly approaching. Henry settled behind his desk and opened a thick folder that Jake recognized with growing horror as a comprehensive personnel file. Pages of documentation spilled across the polished surface, each sheet representing evidence of decisions that had seemed reasonable when viewed through Jake's prejudiced lens, but appeared damning when subjected to objective scrutiny. "Your employment history makes for fascinating reading," Henry began, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone presenting irrefutable evidence. 8 years with this company, 5 different departments, and a remarkable pattern of complaints from minority employees under your supervision. Interesting how these issues seem to follow you from position to position." Jake attempted to interrupt with explanations and justifications, but Henry silenced him with a raised hand that brooked no argument. The older man continued methodically through the documentation, citing specific incidents that painted a clear picture of systematic discrimination disguised as legitimate management decisions. Performance evaluations that mysteriously declined when employees challenged Jake's authority, scheduling conflicts that disproportionately affected certain staff members, and disciplinary actions that revealed obvious bias in their application. Marcus Thompson's termination represents the culmination of this pattern, Henry continued, his words precise and unforgiving. A decorated employee with perfect attendance and exemplary reviews, fired for performing an act of basic human decency that any reasonable supervisor would commend rather than condemn. The file contained copies of Marcus's performance evaluations, each one contradicting Jake's characterization of him as an unreliable employee. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Jake's carefully constructed facade of professional management crumbled under the weight of documented facts that revealed his true motivations. His attempts at explanation grew increasingly desperate as Henry methodically dismantled every justification he offered, exposing the hollow reasoning behind decisions driven by personal prejudice rather than business necessity. "Your services are no longer required by this company," Henry announced with finality that left no room for negotiation. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings, and your access credentials will be deactivated immediately. Any attempt to contact current or former employees regarding this matter will be considered harassment and dealt with accordingly." Jake's termination was swift and thorough, his removal from the building witnessed by the same security staff he had tormented for years. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present, as Carlos and Maria professionally ensured his departure, treating him with more dignity than he had ever shown them. Their restraint spoke volumes about their character compared to the man they were escorting from the premises. Within hours of Jake's dismissal, Henry personally placed a phone call that would change Marcus Thompson's life forever. The conversation was brief but transformative, an invitation to return not just as a security guard, but as the department's new head of operations. The position came with substantial salary increases, comprehensive benefits, and the authority to implement changes that would prevent future discrimination. Marcus sat in stunned silence in his cramped apartment, the phone trembling in his hand as Henry explained the circumstances that had led to this unexpected opportunity. The job offer seemed too good to be true. A fairy tale reversal of fortune that addressed not only his immediate financial crisis, but also validated his decision to help a stranger during that stormy night. "I don't understand why you're doing this," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion and disbelief. "I was just doing what anyone should do in that situation." It wasn't about expecting anything in return. His honesty and humility impressed Henry even more than his original act of kindness had. "That's exactly why you're the right person for this position," Henry replied warmly. Leadership isn't about following rules blindly. It's about making difficult decisions based on moral principles, even when there are personal costs involved. Your character that night demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity this company needs. The transformation was swift and decisive. Justice served with the efficiency that only true authority could deliver. Marcus stood before the bathroom mirror in his newly purchased apartment, adjusting the tie that came with his promotion to head of security operations. The reflection staring back at him still seemed surreal. A professional image that contradicted months of unemployment anxiety and financial desperation. 3 weeks had passed since Henry's phone call, but the transformation felt like awakening from a prolonged nightmare into unexpected daylight. The new apartment occupied the second floor of a renovated brownstone in a neighborhood that Marcus had only driven through during his previous job searches. Hardwood floors gleamed under morning sunlight streaming through large windows, while modern appliances hummed quietly in a kitchen spacious enough for family meals. Zoe's bedroom featured built-in bookshelves and a desk perfect for homework, luxuries that seemed impossible just a month earlier. "Daddy, look what I drew for Mr. Henry!" Zoe burst through the doorway clutching a crayon masterpiece depicting 3 figures holding hands beneath a rainbow. Her artistic interpretation showed Marcus in his security uniform, herself in her new school dress, and Henry wearing what appeared to be a business suit decorated with silver stars. The drawing radiated the innocent joy of a child whose world had suddenly expanded beyond her wildest imagination. The private school that Zoe now attended challenged her intellectually, while providing resources that her previous institution couldn't afford. Art classes, computer labs, and a library filled with current books stimulated her natural curiosity in ways that made Marcus grateful for Henry's insistence on covering educational expenses. Watching his daughter thrive academically justified every moment of uncertainty they had endured together. That evening brought their weekly dinner invitation to Henry's brownstone mansion, a tradition that had developed naturally from their growing friendship. The elderly businessman had proven to be unexpectedly down-to-earth despite his wealth, sharing stories of his own modest beginnings while encouraging Zoe's animated descriptions of school projects and new friendships she was forming. "You've transformed our security department," Henry mentioned during dessert, addressing Marcus with genuine appreciation. "Employee satisfaction surveys show dramatic improvement, and we haven't had a single discrimination complaint since you took over. That's remarkable progress in such a short time frame." His praise carried weight because it was based on measurable results rather than empty flattery. Marcus had implemented changes systematically, focusing on fair scheduling, consistent policy enforcement, and open communication channels that encouraged staff feedback. Training programs emphasized respectful workplace behavior, while clear advancement criteria eliminated subjective evaluations that had previously favored certain employees over others. The department was functioning as a true team for the first time in years. "I learned from watching negative examples," Marcus replied diplomatically, unwilling to dwell on Jake's destructive legacy. "Leadership means creating environments where everyone can succeed based on their contributions, rather than their appearance or background. It's really not complicated when you approach it with basic human decency." His management philosophy reflected lessons learned through personal experience with discrimination. Zoe entertained them with her latest piano recital piece, her small fingers dancing across the keys of Henry's Baby Grand with increasing confidence and skill. The music filled the elegant living room where portraits of Henry's ancestors gazed down approvingly, their stern faces softened by the sounds of childhood joy echoing through halls that had been silent too long. Later that evening, as Marcus tucked Zoe into her new bed surrounded by stuffed animals and favorite books, she asked the question that had been building in her 8-year-old mind for weeks. "Why did Mr. Henry decide to help us when he didn't even know who we were?" Her innocent curiosity touched on the fundamental mystery that had transformed their circumstances so dramatically. "Sometimes good things happen to people who try to do the right thing," Marcus explained gently, smoothing her dark curls against the pillow. "But we can't count on rewards for being good. We have to help others because it's the right thing to do, not because we expect anything back." The lesson was one his grandmother had taught him, and he wanted Zoe to understand its importance regardless of their current fortune. "Like when you helped Mr. Henry in the rain," she said sleepily, her eyes already closing as exhaustion from a full day of school and activities took over. "You didn't know he was important, but you helped him anyway." Her simple wisdom captured the essence of the moral choice that had set their new life in motion. Marcus kissed her forehead and turned off the bedside lamp, leaving only the soft glow of a nightlight to ward off any remaining shadows. Walking to his own room, he reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them from desperation to security through one act of basic human kindness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight he felt profound gratitude for second chances and the power of doing what's right. 6 months after Marcus's promotion, the ripple effects of his leadership style had transformed workplace culture throughout Whitman Corporation. Other department heads began adopting his inclusive management approaches, creating a collaborative atmosphere that boosted productivity while reducing employee turnover significantly. The company's human resources department documented these improvements as case studies for future training programs. Marcus volunteered his weekends at the community center, teaching conflict resolution workshops to young adults facing employment challenges similar to those he had once endured. His personal story of perseverance resonated with audiences who saw their own struggles reflected in his journey from unemployment to executive leadership. The workshops consistently filled beyond capacity, with participants eager to learn from someone who understood their circumstances firsthand. Zoe's essay about courage and kindness earned first place in the citywide elementary school writing competition. Her thoughtful reflections on her father's character inspiring judges who rarely encountered such mature insights from 8-year-old contestants. The prize ceremony, attended by Henry and several Whitman Corporation executives, celebrated not just academic achievement, but the family values that had shaped her perspective on helping others. "My daddy says that being brave isn't about not being scared," Zoe read from her winning essay to the assembled audience. "It's about doing good things even when you might get in trouble. When he helped Mr. Henry, he knew he might lose his job, but he helped anyway because that's what good people do." Her innocent wisdom captured truths that many adults struggled to articulate. The scholarship fund that Henry established in Sarah Thompson's memory provided educational opportunities for children from single-parent households, ensuring that financial hardship wouldn't limit their academic potential. Marcus served on the selection committee, his insights helping identify deserving recipients whose determination reminded him of his own daughter's resilience during their most difficult period. Corporate social responsibility initiatives flourished under the new cultural emphasis on community engagement. Employee volunteer programs connected Whitman Corporation staff with local nonprofits, while mentorship opportunities paired successful professionals with disadvantaged youth seeking career guidance. The company's reputation for ethical leadership attracted top talent while strengthening relationships with community organizations. Carlos received his promotion to Assistant Security Director, his patient dedication finally receiving the recognition it deserved after years of Jake's discriminatory oversight. His bilingual skills and cultural sensitivity made him particularly effective at building bridges between diverse team members, creating an inclusive environment where everyone felt valued and respected. The local newspaper featured Marcus's story as part of their annual series highlighting community heroes, though he insisted on crediting Henry's generosity rather than accepting praise for his own actions. The article emphasized how individual choices could create positive change, inspiring readers to consider their own capacity for making differences in others' lives. Sunday dinners at Henry's mansion became cherished family traditions, with Zoe considering the elderly businessman her honorary grandfather. Their conversations ranged from business ethics to childhood memories, bridging generational gaps through shared values and mutual affection. Henry often remarked that Marcus and Zoe had given him purposes he hadn't realized were missing from his life. Marcus reflected on their transformation during quiet evening moments, grateful for lessons learned through adversity and opportunities earned through integrity. The stormy night that had seemed like personal disaster had actually been a doorway to possibilities beyond his imagination. His grandmother's teachings about helping others had proven prophetic, though the rewards had exceeded anything she might have predicted. The community center where Marcus volunteered planned to name their new youth development wing in honor of the Thompson family, recognizing their contributions to breaking cycles of poverty through education and mentorship. The dedication ceremony would celebrate not just individual achievements, but the collective power of people choosing compassion over convenience in their daily decisions. 1 year later, Marcus stood on the balcony of his apartment watching Zoe play in the courtyard below, her laughter mixing with other children's voices in a symphony of carefree joy. The scared little girl who once worried about her father's stress had blossomed into a confident student whose future seemed limitless. Her new friendships and academic achievements reflected the stability that had replaced uncertainty in their daily lives. Henry's health remained strong despite his advancing years, their weekly dinners continuing to strengthen bonds that transcended employer-employee relationships. The elderly businessman had discovered renewed purpose through his mentorship role, finding satisfaction in watching Marcus's professional growth and Zoe's educational progress. Their unlikely friendship proved that meaningful connections could emerge from unexpected circumstances. The security department operated with efficiency and mutual respect that set standards for other corporate divisions. Employee satisfaction ratings reached record highs under Marcus's leadership, while discrimination complaints became non-existent. His management philosophy of treating people with dignity regardless of background had created workplace culture that attracted talented individuals from diverse backgrounds. Reflecting on that transformative stormy evening, Marcus understood how single moments could redirect entire life trajectories. The decision to help a struggling stranger had cost him one job, but led to opportunities beyond his imagination. More importantly, it had validated his grandmother's teachings about moral responsibility and community obligation. Teaching Zoe these same values remained his primary focus, ensuring she understood that privilege carried responsibility to help others facing similar struggles. Their story would continue inspiring community members who learned that kindness, even when costly, possessed power to change lives in ways that extended far beyond immediate consequences.